We're back at it, but not everything's as it was. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of F1 in Review 2023. I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. Racing is back, and today we're looking back at that very Grand Prix, the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and the first sprint race at Baku. So first of all, starting with the race winner, he started in P3 but finished in P1. Sergio Perez won the first race back, and he's closed the gap in the championship to his teammates after benefiting, it's fair to say, from the incident involving Nick de Vries that ultimately triggered a safety car after yellow flags were raised. Now, none of us predicted that Perez would win this race, if you are to go and listen back to the previous episode, but he's won at this circuit twice now, and he's also dubbed, of course, the Street Circuit King, so nobody can be too surprised by this, can they, Tristan?
They can't, and I think this also puts to rest a little bit those, Verstappen fans, although I hadn't used the word fan, chanting from the sidelines that Perez can't beat Verstappen unless Verstappen's car is broken. And he's proved everyone wrong and beat him in Baku. And a track that I think it's one of those tracks where if you do get close to someone, you have an excellent chance of overtaking them thanks to that enormously long back straight, which is just ludicrously long. And paired with a DRS section within it as well. I know the Red Bulls made it look easy getting past people like Charles Leclerc. But Perez was able to shake Verstappen off really, really easily, I think. And not only shake him off, but consistently throughout the latter sort of half of the race was 2 to 3 seconds ahead. And if you listen to the onboard radio, then actually it was funny because Red Bull were saying to Max, you got to be targeting these lower numbers, which is something we're not really used to hearing. It's not often that we hear Max being told you've got to pick up the pace a little bit. And every time Max put in a faster lap, Perez was putting a faster lap in as well, which implied to me that they were basically kind of level pegging, I'd say, throughout that race. I think Perez has yet again demonstrated to everyone just how good he is. And I think Will Buxton summarised it really nicely, actually, when he said it's not going to beat his first ever win, but it was up there with one of his best drives. And make no mistake, Baku, even when you're cruising along in the lead, is a challenging track. There is very little runoff, and throughout the weekend, be it Formula 2 or Formula 1, that we saw how easily it is to go from hero to zero and throw yourself into a barrier. I mean, let's not forget that pole position, Charles Leclerc even hit the barrier after he got the pole position. So, yeah, hero to zero very easily. But Perez was a cool, calm street king and is closing down on Max Verstappen. Does it have the same sort of vibes as last year when Perez was getting closer to Verstappen? Is this a moment that we can start to see the real championship rival appearing out of the dust? And not Charles Leclerc, but it could be Verstappen's right-hand man, Mr. Sergio Perez.
Well, is he his right-hand man anymore? That's the question. If you listen to the messages on the team radio after Sunday's race, a very telling message, I think, from Perez, where he basically said something along the lines of, "This is for you guys, we are still in the fight." Now, was that aimed at the whole team or not? I'd say based on that wording, quite possibly not. also, if you take into account Christian Horner's wording to Max Verstappen, saying to Max on the radio, "It's okay, Checo got lucky with the safety car." That's so yeah. So very interesting team dynamic that could be appearing amongst that. I think that it seems to me that I say we, but I'm not. It's probably perhaps me more myself. But we or I keep on writing off Sergio Perez and being under the impression or the illusion that it's something which is out of his range. A championship fight is out of his grasp because even when he's got the best car on the grid, he's got a teammate who is ahead of him on general pace. But Perez just keeps he keeps never giving up. He keeps never giving up. I read a very interesting comment. From a lady called Bernie Collins, who used to be the head of race strategy at Aston Martin and Force India and Racing Point, and she's now Sky pundit. And she said Checo, obviously what Sergio Perez is known as to the paddock, Checo's greatest trait is his resilience. So basically his ability to bounce back, to just keep going, like not give up in any respect. Think of scenarios in his career like when he was racing for McLaren and then he had to go and he had a pretty rubbish year there and he had to go rebuild his reputation at Force India. Or when the Racing Point, the year that they went for Sebastian Vettel and kept Lance Stroll and Sergio Perez was out of a team. And he just kept on going, proving his worth. It's almost like he went, I'm not giving up. I'm going to prove to people why I want this race seat or why I deserve it. And he went and won that race, that crazy race in Sakir. And even at Red Bull, he's proving more and more like his worth. He's fighting back. He's being resilient, and he's now just 6 points behind Verstappen in the championship. Which, if you said to me that would have happened after 4 races, I wouldn't necessarily have believed you. But there he is. He's creeping up on Verstappen. Verstappen still is the faster driver, and he, without saying it explicitly, he has the favouritism from the team, I'd say. But Perez ain't going away. He's nipping at his heels. He's not staying silent, and it remains to be seen if in the long run he keeps on being there, like sort of yapping at his heels. But the signs are good for Perez so far. He's a strong start to the season. Maybe year 3 at the new team is finally the one paying dividends, or at least it seems to be.
Yeah, most definitely. I do think we do have a clear, obvious and evident title fight on our hands between the two. And there's many reasons, but the main two are the following. First of all, there seems to be no obvious rival or competitor to Red Bull. Last year, Ferrari was the better team in terms of the constructor or the car they delivered, the more established driver pairing. This time, they're coming back into the fight, seemingly, if you look at this Grand Prix in isolation. But Aston Martin tailed off, so there's no obvious competitor like in the Mercedes days, for example, where it was Hamilton versus Rosberg, and then there were other teams behind them, but more fighting with each other than fighting with the main team. So that gives Perez more of a chance. And as well, I think he's more experienced now, not only when it comes to racing in Formula 1, but obviously with Red Bull as well. And I go as far to say he's coming into the richest vein of form of his career ever. Because it's one thing to do it very well with Racing Point, with Force India, with, dare I say, a lesser team, but to do it with one of the best teams, if not currently the best team in Formula 1, against one of the best drivers in the modern era of Formula 1, and to beat him twice out of, 4 races, that takes some doing, really. You can go and say, well, the safety car helped him, there were issues with Verstappen's car, he got a bit lucky, but sure, there's luck that everyone has, but the ability to go and grasp that opportunity, take it for yourself mercilessly, and then go and drive home the advantage is something else entirely, really. And 6 points, that's no difference at all, is there, really? There's only has to go and be 1 or 2 issues with Verstappen, or unfortunately 1 or 2 issues with Perez, and that gap widens or shortens accordingly. So all to play for, really. Perez has got a contract with Red Bull for many a year to come. He's established himself as a very good driver for them. He's not in a more vulnerable situation as he was previously, and for that reason I think that if Perez wants to fight for this championship, it's going to be very, very difficult for Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, everyone else to try and stop him, really, because if you try and stop him, arguably you make the situation worse, and I put bad feeling, dare I say, in the camp, which currently, you can read into a few messages if you want, but currently hasn't existed for many years, months or days really with this team. But what do you guys think? Do we have a title fight?
I do really think there's a title fight. I
do.
But this is what we said last year.
But the thing is, though, Perez is, as I say, fighting with Verstappen as the only key sort of, competitor to him. He's more experienced. I think it's not going to be an obvious one, like, let's say, I don't know, Hamilton versus Verstappen, Hamilton versus Rosberg. I don't think it's that close, but I do think that there is a clear opportunity and a clear, a gap in the market, if you will, an opening for there to be a fight more so this year than last year.
I mean, I agree that it's between the Red Bulls. 14 wins in 15 races is just insane. I found out that that's the third time in the hybrid era a team has taken 14 wins in a block of 15 races, which is just sad. If you want to know, that's 2014 to 2015 Mercedes, 2015 to 2016 Mercedes, and then 2022 to 2023 that's Red Bull. Oof. That's 14 wins in 15 races is France over to Azerbaijan. This from 2022 to 2023, with only Brazil. If you remember Brazil, they didn't win because Mercedes won that. So depressingly, the one that they didn't win went to Mercedes. That's what I was saying. Oh God. Oh God. There you go. We're back to this, but this is the thing, right? Surely it's not a title fight, because I just don't see Perez having the absolute pace. In regards to the rest of the tracks, I think maybe a Formula One had only street circuits, and I think I'll be slightly more optimistic. There's no getting away from the fact that Perez is keeping it close, but I think the thing that's going to have to really help Perez is everyone else around them fighting Max. I don't know about you, but I feel like the fact that the pack seems to me to be closer means people are being a little bit more aggressive than we've seen for a while, and people are being really aggressive when it comes to Max. And I'm sure we will talk about the George Russell, Max Verstappen incident during the sprint race in a bit. But I can't see Perez beating Verstappen on absolute pace. It's a bit like how Bottas was by far and away the second best driver on the grid for a long time. But we might not... I wouldn't say, well, Bottas is definitely beating Hamilton. There was just another level there. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily as bad as the Bottas Hamilton time, but I would say Perez is, 98%, 97% as fast as Verstappen. And we're just, when it's Baku and places, other street tracks, perhaps we're seeing the overlap, but that extra 3% makes a difference. I couldn't see Perez taking the fight to Hamilton in 2021 in the same way. And I don't know, when Verstappen feels threatened, I think he elevates himself to a new level. And I think that's the thing that will prevent Perez from perhaps taking the title.
Yeah, I don't think Perez will win it, to be clear. But if you're looking at the first four races, for example, he's matched Verstappen in all but one race. And if I look back to the Australian Grand Prix as well, I think he was involved in a near collision or an incident there. So you've got to go and, I suppose, show some mercy, if you will, to that result compared to the others. But I take your point. It's going to be another Hamilton-Bottas scenario. But I think that Perez has a bit more fight about him, dare I say, than Bottas. I think Bottas was always of the opinion he was just happy to be there, dare I say. That may be totally wrong in the way that he sort of presented himself, but with Perez, I do get the feeling that he's had to fight for literally every part of his career to be where he is. Granted, he's come from, a fair amount of money to get him into the sport, but no one's ever really backed him or rated him, so I think that's what drives him on more than anything else. And there's no obvious successor as well to Perez at the moment. And that's what's to his advantage. There's nobody in AlphaTauri, Tsunoda or Nick De Vries, particularly De Vries on current form, who's going to go and take that seat away from him. So unless they're going to go all in for someone like Lando Norris, the seat's his until the contract runs out. And are you going to go and sack a driver who's done so very well and push your main driver and help to elevate him and keep things competitive? Well, you'd be a very foolish team if you did, in my view.
I have a follow-up question, I suppose, and perhaps, Angus, you can feed into this as well. Do you think Perez would have got past Verstappen without the little bit of lady luck on the side that allowed him to jump Verstappen thanks to the safety car?
No, I don't think so. Honestly, I think he had a pace advantage with Verstappen the whole weekend, and it's odd in that, because in my mind, and maybe I have to change this sheet, but Baku's a track where overtaking is more easy because you actually have that, as you mentioned earlier, that huge long straight, which is like 2 kilometres. They're flat out for 2 kilometres or something ridiculous. And even though the cars hit the limiter, hit their top speed, you'd still have enough space, enough distance, in fact, to make an overtake with the DRS on. But yet this weekend, an issue we found with the race was that this wasn't happening with lots of drivers, and they were struggling to get past. So part of me thought surely Verstappen would have been able to make that move once he's had that bit of poor luck and Perez has got in front. But it turns out he didn't. Now I think that's more to do with the track characteristics rather than Verstappen not being able to get past or Perez being able to defend stoutly, defend adequately. Because I think Verstappen just had a pace advantage this weekend. Perez, I think, won based on his composure and his ability to hold the lead. And he's one of those drivers, I think, where Verstappen I'd back to win from anywhere. Like, as you saw last year, he won from, there's a set of races where he won from 14th in Belgium. He won from 7th in Italy at Monza. It's easy to say that when you got the fastest car like he did, but you've got to get the job done. And some drivers in the past would start further back with a rapid car and would not be able to progress to win a race. But Verstappen does that. But Perez is one of those drivers, and I think some drivers, that category of drivers which are like sort of not the very best but very good. So I'm thinking ones like Perez or Bottas, or I remember watching Mark Webber back in the day. They all had those three. They all had faster teammates who were more sort of dynamic and more electric pace. But drivers like Perez or Jenson Button, if they got in front, you wouldn't stop them. They'd be very happy controlling the front of a race. But coming from behind was not their strength, because often it would be a so-called better driver in front of them. I think that helped Perez on Sunday. As soon as he got in front, that's his comfort zone. He controls races. Think of Monaco last year, where he led for so long from the front, or somewhere like, what's another race where he won from the front? I suppose, off the top of my head, something like Saudi Arabia this year. He got in the lead, and then he got in the lead, didn't he, from an early position, and then he held the lead. And I think that's just where his forte is. So I think that if the roles were swapped, Verstappen ain't relinquishing that lead, because Perez doesn't suit coming from behind, whilst he does very much suit staying at the front.
I think I get what you mean.
I
mean, he certainly has the capacity to run and to lead. I think it's one of those tricky questions, because to overtake a teammate, firstly, and kudos to Red Bull, I think, for letting them race. But I don't know. I think I kind of disagree. I think in this case, Perez kind of had him. Had Verstappen on absolute pace, and I think Verstappen's reaction was rather telling afterwards. In the cool down room, he basically just said to Perez, "Oh, these things happen," and it was kind of calm about it. And it felt to me, maybe I'm projecting, that I think actually Verstappen knew that Perez was just a bit quicker, and I mean, he was clearly giving it his all. But before he got overtaken, Perez was getting within the 1 second mark of DRS. So I actually think perhaps Perez would have got past. Now it's a moot point because he clearly did get past, but it is not a coincidence that Perez and Verstappen were very, very nearly at the same point when Verstappen was called in to do the pit stop. And that actually gave Perez a huge advantage because Perez was going down the back straight at full pelt when Verstappen was going through the pit lane. And then when Verstappen was coming out of the pit lane, having negated the full length, the back straight, that's when the safety car came out. So when Verstappen eventually got round the track, he was unable to go down, full pelt down the pit lane, which gave Perez ample time, and to get pitted. It was, I think, actually you make your own luck, and Perez could have had a race where in this occasion, actually there was a safety car, but he wasn't in the right position to get a benefit from it, and that could have well happened. So I think actually he did have the measure of Max here, but as I say, if you look at the quality of Max's racing in other tracks, I just can't see it. I can't see it, and I think that's a bit of a shame. But what I will say is, if Max does get into some accidents, if he does have problems this year because people seem to be quite aggressive with him, then there is very little substitute to a DNF. Even you can win Formula One by having loads of second places if the person in first place has some unfortunate accidents, unreliability issues and other such measures. So maybe I'm sort of twiddling my thumbs a bit, sitting on the fence by supporting Tom's argument there. I wouldn't quite count Perez out just yet, but I still can't see him winning.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think to wrap up on this entire topic, really, my view of Perez is, going back to Angus's point, he's a very patchy driver, and currently he's on a purple patch, and dare I say his purple patches have been getting longer the more he's been at Red Bull, owing to his experience with them and his experience in Formula One as well. But yeah, it has become a purple season for him to win versus a purple patch. So all eyes on the next race for him, at least, to see how he does versus the current number one driver in terms of both number on the grid and also number one in the paddock as well.
And yes, to offer my thoughts, is the title on? Nah, sorry. I hate to be a party pooper, but I think Verstappen just has that pace advantage. We saw last year his ability as the car got faster to really take the championship by the throat and place it right where he wanted it. So I could see a similar thing happening again this year. He's got more staying power as well, I'd say.
So not even a fight then?
Maybe a fight early on, and you see it often, I think, with a championship where there is a smallish gap between a couple of drivers at the top, and we feel a championship is there to be won, but then in reality one driver takes it by the scruff of the neck as the season prolongs.
So the sprint was back this weekend, but not as we knew it from before. This time around it was a standalone event where the qualifying grid and the final classification had ultimately no bearing on Sunday's race, or how they set up for that as well. Verstappen has been very lukewarm on this sort of format, the new one and the older one best really, and his mind hasn't really changed after this weekend. Our thoughts on his comments regarding the sprint race, Angus?
The sprint... Here I am fishing for something positive about it, I promise.
Yeah.
No, I'm just not convinced by the format still. I'm just like, we could raise several points about it. I've always thought, Tristan, you've always gone on about how doesn't feel like a sprint because it's still half an hour long. Which is quite long for something that's a sprint, or supposed to be a sprint. I think that it wasn't helped by the track not being very generous to on-track action and overtaking this weekend. Is what I referred to last week's podcast, the sort of the boom and bust cycle of Baku, where it literally is feast or famine. One race it's like chaotic, crazy, there's multiple safety cars, it's wild. But then if there isn't any of that, it kind of just everyone just goes around and not much happens. And this happened in the sprint a bit. It didn't seem to me that the jeopardy that was spoken about was there. There didn't seem to be a less jeopardy, and cars didn't seem to go for it as much. To be honest, it just seems the same as before, even though it was a standalone event. Perhaps the most interesting part was Yuki Tsunoda crabbing along after he damaged his suspension. Why on earth did AlphaTauri send him out, by the way?
Oh yeah.
Did you see that on the replay? There's some guy in a yellow helmet went up to the right rear wheel and went, "Yeah, that's fine. Out you go."
Sticking in the wrong direction. Perfect.
Yeah,
that's the accuracy that they promote.
Yeah, that ended up being the highlight of the whole thing, in my opinion. There were a few overtakes. There's some nice little battles between Stroll and Albon was one that stuck out. Some Hasses did some overtakings. That was quite nice. Nick De Vries overtook someone, which he hasn't done a lot of this year, so
a rarity.
Yes, exactly. The battle at the front was all right, like the top three, but with the way that the Ferrari has been this year, it's a bit like Baku a couple of years ago when Ferrari were kind of on their way back, where Leclerc took a bit of a shock pole, and you kind of thought to yourself, well, great, but he's going to be overtaken eventually, isn't he? And it was on about lap 5 or 6. So yeah, I remain unconvinced. I'm kind of like, I'm not quite like Max Verstappen. I'm not sitting there thinking, right, I'm going to stop watching F1 completely. The sprint is awful. I hate it. Forget the whole sport. I don't like it anymore. But I do agree with him that it could F1 could do without them. So I remain to be convinced on this aspect of the Grand Prix weekend. I'd like to get your thoughts, to be fair, though, as you two are perhaps more sort of sympathetic to the sprint than I. What did you think in terms of the weekend format? So obviously we had that extra sprint shootout qualifying session where I was trying to get my head around SQ1, SQ2 and SQ3. What did you guys think of that little Saturday morning mini qualifying that was introduced?
I think it's too confusing. It's far too confusing. In fact, the commentators, I got confused. I follow Formula 1 and I get really confused. I was trying to remember. I was like, oh yeah, okay, so we've had qualifying, but it's not qualifying. We're not allowed to call it qualifying anymore, so it's SQ1, SQ2. And I think that's just funny. It's just amusing to me that how complicated it's got now. So qualifying and then not qualifying, SQ1, SQ2 and SQ3 directly relates to the sprint afterwards. And then you have to set that distinctly away from Friday for qualifying for Sunday. So, like, I don't know. It was a bit weird. It was a bit weird on Sunday because I was like, hold on a minute. We've done this. And also, why is Leclerc at the front again? Oh, of course he's at the front again because he got pole on Friday. But surely the same thing's going to happen. Exactly the same thing's going to happen on Sunday as it did on Saturday. And it did. Of course it did. Why would anything change? I don't know. It's just getting... It's like a... one of those ridiculous burgers you see on the internet when it's like 6 patties and 5 buns and it's enormously long and you think, look, that's not edible. No one's going to eat that. It's ridiculous. Just simplify it back down. And it felt like that. It felt like we've got far too many races and far too many qualifiers, and it just turns into a blur of content actually. And I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty bored. I was pretty bored throughout the whole thing. I'm sorry, but it just was a bit of a waste of time, actually, the sprint this weekend. And I'm thinking now that we've got over the honeymoon period of sprints, I'm settling more on the side of Angus's perspective of it just seems a bit of a waste of time because it doesn't add anything. And I'm not opposed to the idea of sprint races, but here's my proposition for changing it, and that is we need to make them, and I think actually we've discussed before, we need to make them mean something. So my proposition is we make the sprint race reverse grid, and it kind of defaults into a game of cat and mouse. What I mean by that is the slower cars run away from the fast cars who are trying to catch them. Right? That's what it's cat and mouse, and that's a really fun experience. And we do that in Formula 2, so it's not like I'm pulling out of thin air. But hey, stick to SQ1, SQ2, SQ3. Fine, that's all right. I don't mind having a separate qualifying because it kind of makes sense in this scenario. So SQ1, SQ2, SQ3, and that sets the fastest time order, and then that directly relates to the Sunday grid as well. So maybe it's actually qualifying, because then cars won't purposely go slow. So you have one qualifying, and then you reverse that for Saturday sprint race. The slower cars try and run away from the faster cars and try and get a few, token points. Excellent. They're all happy. And then on Sunday, you have the grand race, the big race. And that's completely different because the slow cars are at the back and the fast cars are at the front. We'll see something completely unique. And hey, that's it. Sorted. Saturday is a unique display. And that's, I think, what I want. Otherwise, it's just the same old, same old. It's like having bangers and mash for breakfast and bangers and mash for dinner. You're going to think it's a bit boring.
Yeah, it sort of reminded me, the sprint was like one of those trailers for a really good film where it just sort of told you the story already. So you watch it and you go, well, I know what's going to happen. So is there any point wasting 3 hours of my life? Probably not, no. Go and check at the end to see, oh, yep, that did happen because it's in the trailer. So I agree entirely. There should be a reverse grid. There should be a new element, really, to the sprint race because otherwise it is literally just, hey, there's going to be more of this tomorrow. Tune in tomorrow. There'll be more. There's not enough now, but there'll be more tomorrow. Yeah. So definitely there needs to be some change there as well. And I think there needs to be change. We spoke about this earlier, I think, in episodes gone by. A fluctuation or at least some leniency when it comes to the cost cap or damage inflicted in the sprint races, because I think where Verstappen's gripe really comes from is the fact that his car has sustained a decent amount of damage just before the race, give or take. His team then have to go and literally work around the clock to go and fix that said car, and a bit more of the, I suppose, cost cap or the budget for the season is gone because they're repairing something which ultimately means nothing. If they're repairing a car and, let's say, flushing £20,000-30,000 down the toilet for 50 points or 15 or something or a meaningful amount, it'd be like, oh, okay, I can see why we're doing this. It makes sense, we're getting points, means justifies the end and all that, but it's like, we're doing this for a couple of points, which we're going to get more of tomorrow anyway. So why even field a car? And I think many teams are thinking that at the moment, particularly at Baku, and I think it will come round at many other circuits as well, where there shouldn't really be sprints. There should just be one race, or at least something different when it comes to the Saturday. So, yeah, to be clear, I've never really been a huge fan of the sprint, but I've always been a realist insofar as it's not going to go anywhere. But there has been good change so far in the standalone element, so I'm nothing if not an optimist. So keep those fingers crossed, folks.
To add an element of balance, I have another Steiner fact that is relatable to this particular topic. And that is, Gunther Steiner is apparently, according to his book, in favour of the sprint races, as he says that sprint races are a good thing for the sport because it allows them to add a new element without having to change anything from his perspective. There's not much they have to do in excess of what they do anyway, and so they really enjoy them. So it seems to me like at least good to Steiner, and I think some of the other team principals said they also kind of enjoy them as well.
The one thing I can say about sprints and their confusion is, and the stuff that came this weekend. So, George Russell, he qualified 11th in qualifying, obviously. He came 11th, and then he qualifies 4th in the sprint qualifying, which was the grid order for the spread race. He comes 4th. Then I look at the start of the race on Sunday afternoon. And I was like, whoa, George Russell's had an awful start. He started 4th and now he's 9th. Wow, that's dreadful. And then I was like, oh yeah, he starts 11th, doesn't he? Because it's not that qualifying. It's the one that was on Friday night. And it's just really confusing. At first I was like, oh my word, he's lost 5 places on the run to turn 1. That's like the shortest run to turn 1 in the season. How has he missed the lights by 1 second or something? But no, it was the other order. So I've now got 2 different orders to remember. One for the sprint qualifying, one for the race. And it sums up by, as I look through, I always have the Wikipedia page of the most recent results open for the podcast to make sure I've got all the timings here. And I'm scrolling through and I've got qualifying, sprint shootouts, sprint reports, sprint classification, race. It's just too much. It's just a lot. and it makes it confusing. It would be my another thing to add to it. But I want to touch upon the reverse grid idea, because whilst I disagree with reverse grids in principle and think they're a bit too gimmicky, and they only work in series such as, I remember as a young boy watching the British Touring Car Championship, where basically they would reverse the grid, but then the cars at the front, who ended up at the front after being reversed, would get more ballast. So basically, that would make it more even. So you'd be further up in a slightly heavier car. And I think it works for some championships. I don't think it worked for Formula 1, but I am curious. I'd just like to see maybe one time them just flip the grid. So you'd have on the front, if we were to flip the qualifying from this weekend, you'd have a front row of Nick de Vries and Pierre Gasly, with Magnussen and Hulkenberg on row 2. And then you'd have the back row be Verstappen and Leclerc, with Perez and Sainz just in front.
Yeah,
I would like to see, maybe just once, it would be fun just to see that once and see how it transpires, because I can picture a train from 1st to 20th as the fastest cars inevitably close up to the slowest cars. It wouldn't necessarily happen like that, but I'd be curious. I don't like the idea, but I'd still be curious, like as a one-off, just a sort of a why not, let's give it a go, but it doesn't mean anything.
Well, we've sort of had it once, sort of, very, very slightly. And if you remember Brazil, we had a weird qualifying where Kevin Magnussen qualified in first, and so we had this unusual position where, just through some good timing, etc., a car that would usually be mid to low pack is at the front, and he in the sprint race went from 1st to 8th position, which means he managed to hold on to get a crucial point. And that means he beat teams like McLaren, beat teams like Aston Martin. And you'd say, oh, yeah, okay. And Alpines, for example, beat the Alpines as well. You think, right, okay, well, then clearly it beats kind of beating teams that you wouldn't expect to, because he's having to run away. So in that very, very singular case, and it's the only one we've got really, these things happening like that, we can see how the teams, the slower teams, are able to hold their own, are able to defend. And if you're only having to defend for like 10 laps, then we could see some really cool racing. I could imagine Max having to go wheel to wheel with so many other drivers. We would just get battles that we wouldn't ever see. And I'm in favour of that. And I think the problem I've got is F1 saying, we're being brave by trying new things. And my response is, you're not. You're not being brave trying new things. You're just trying the same old thing, but on just a sort of a micro scale. As Tom, you said, it is a trailer for the next day. And so I just think they're going to have to make it distinct. And I'm glad, you're in favour as well, Angus, of trying it once, because if they really are brave, they really are all out about pushing the boat out and exciting new fans, then give it a go. Give it a go once. Yeah, or twice. Say, right, that's it. This doesn't work. Give it a go twice. See what happens. Yeah, that was disaster. And then it would make me shut up. I'll shut up after that. If they give it a go and bring up again. But at least give it a go. Otherwise, it's just a bit of a waste of time.
And if they're so concerned or worried about how it'll affect the championship, why not do it after the season's ended, before everyone packs up and goes away, as a sort of one-off feature race, if you will? Sort of, this is what we could do, here's sample X, see what we can do here.
Yeah, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Like, we'd try it at Abu Dhabi after on the final race, and it won't count towards the championship. Because I think that is certainly a really good option, actually, to test it. I mean, we don't really have testing for ideas other than testing for cars. So yeah, I'm kind of in favour of that concept, because they've got to try something. I'm glad they've increased the number of engines finally, and the engine components. Charles Leclerc will be very pleased about that, given that he'll only, I don't know, get penalised twice now rather than 3 times. So they're up to 4 engines and components, which is excellent. So it seems like we are slowly drifting in the right direction, but I think they need to get paddles in the water and start actually rowing towards a decent solution rather than what they're doing now, which is kind of drifting where the tide may take them. And I think if they keep it like this, what's ended up going to happen is they're just going to scrap them, and then we will have wasted a whole load of time.
And carbon fibre, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, is Miami this weekend?
It is, yeah.
Mm.
God, my least favourite race.
Your least favourite race so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, partly because do you remember all the antics last year that went on? That was just atrocious. With the NFL helmets on the podium and the ticker tape and all that rubbish.
All the celebrities yelling at Martin Brundle for daring to talk to them.
Yes.
Yeah. There is actually that came up in Goodstein's book as well, about that, and I was quite pleased that Steiner kind of fell onto the same side as us, which is if you're entering our house, you play by our rules, and if you're willing to have the free publicity, the free tickets, then you should also be asked to talk to media and promote the sport, because by ignoring people like Martin Brundle and the other pundits, they're basically, shooing away from the promotion which they've signed up to, and that's not good for anybody. So I think maybe also in the teams they were pretty annoyed as well with the antics of last year. But hey, maybe it'll be different this time. Get Trevor Noah back onto the everyone's screens, because he is incredibly passionate about Formula One, and I think his interview last year, I think it might have been Circuit in the Americas rather than Miami, was really interesting, and one of the very few times I've actually watched a celebrity interview and really enjoyed it. So if you haven't actually watched that, go watch that interview. I think it's with Sky and Trevor Noah.
So Esteban Ocon had a fairly unspectacular and, dare I say, uneventful race on Sunday, for the most part at least, but that will change when he pitted on the last lap, only to be met by a sea of photographers and media trying to get a good view of the end. Now, luckily nobody was hurt by this, but the FIA say they're taking immediate steps to reconsider its end of race procedures and protocols. The stewards say FIA representatives expressed their regret at what happened and assured us that this will not happen the next time around at the next event. Our reaction about this very bizarre sort of last moments of the race.
Well, what was your reaction, Tom?
My reaction? Well, it was one of those things where you couldn't quite believe what was coming before your very eyes, I think. It's one of those where you thought, well, surely everyone knows that the race is still live, things are still ongoing, Ocon hadn't pitted, or was in dire need to pit, should I say, moving forward. So the idea of them coming into the pit lane in the final lap or so to go and finish the race, as is his prerogative, is something that nobody should rule out. So the fact that people were allowed to be on the very pit lane itself, and then again hadn't even seen Ocon as he trundled down the pit lane, if you will, hadn't even been given warning or indeed listened to the warning that someone is coming down the pit lane, get out of the way, is remarkable, really. But I think it's another example of where the powers that be in Formula One have really been blindsided, and it's a clear oversight, really, of health and safety in some elements. Now, They get it right so often when it comes to racing, halos, procedures in that regard, but the fact that something so basic like this could happen, and yes, no one was hurt, which is granted, and that's a good thing, of course, but the fact that someone could have by something so innocuous is laughable, really, in 2023. So there's two takeaways, really. Should they have been doing that? They have their own prerogative to do what they want, the photographers, etc. and co. No, they shouldn't have. They have to go and take part of the blame, yes, but for those who are in charge of health and safety, refereeing the sport, if you will, it's equally upon them to go, no, you're not allowed beyond this line, you're not allowed on the paddock, regardless of what you want, because you doing that put yourself and therefore others in danger. So a disappointing, sour note, really, and a real bizarre one. That would be my sort of, I suppose, summing up words, if you will.
I just can't understand what was going through their minds. They know that the race is still going on, so it's a bit like what happened is the equivalent of a marshal. The equivalent of a marshal, like going out on the track to start clearing up as on the last lap. He's like, "Wow, it's basically finished, so I'll just start clearing up." Oh my God, here's a Formula One car! Oh my word! I get the photographers want to get in a position, but like, take your time, man. That's like we joke about it in a way, but it could have ended so badly, and it's a real near miss. It reminded me a bit of, was it Singapore a few years ago when a marshal, I'd say about the marshals, when a marshal was on the track clearing up some debris at the end of a safety car, and he literally ran off just as the cars were coming onto the start-finish straight. He just got out of the way. And the thing with Ocon is that I feel like they should at least know, if you're a photographer at a Formula 1 race, surely you would know, right, that cars can pit on the last lap. So it's almost as if someone's gone, oh well, it's almost the end of the race, the pits will basically be closed now. What if someone comes in because they got a problem? Like, what if someone had come in because they had a technical issue and they had to coast into the pits, but the photographers have set up and been there? Like, it's ridiculous, really. It just it feels like a lack of awareness from, like, just certain people, whether that's those in charge or the photographers themselves. Just a lack of awareness of what's actually required to run an event such as this, because that could have ended so badly, and we are lucky that it didn't in the end.
Yeah, I think it's one of those odd scenarios where everyone saw it coming, but because we were in the privileged position not to be there live. And I think this is something that we forget watching it through TV screens, having access to loads of data, is Formula 1 is an odd sport, because I think it's maybe is worse going in person. I've gone to watch races live, and if you have to, you can probably empathize with this, but I think you kind of get lost in the sport when you go see it live, and you watch it in a different way. And certainly I did. It's like, oh look, here they come. Oh, there they are. Right, who was that? Right. What lap we on? And also, what language is it on the commentary? I mean, when I went to Germany, they were doing it in 3 different languages, and I really couldn't track, what lap we were on and everything like that. And it was just exciting, and so it is really easy to be like, well, how could they possibly have not seen it coming? Because we saw it coming. And actually, when you're there, it's ridiculous. It is really hard to track everything that's going on. And a photographer is not really going to be caring, I don't think, about what lap they're on. They saw everyone go, and herd mentality states that you go when everyone else goes, right? I think we've all done that. We followed a crowd into a somewhere, and you thought, I don't know, why are we here? However, clearly that shouldn't happen like this in a live race. And my question is what's the procedures to allow photographers and media onto the pit lane? Because it's one thing for the photographers to not know what's going on, but surely Formula 1, like the race control, says to the people guarding the pit lane, okay, now you can let everyone go. So if anyone was to blame, I would be blaming Formula 1 management and not the photographers. Like, they're not going to know when it's time to go. They're not going to know pit stops or anything like that. Thank goodness that none of them did get hit by Ocon, because that would have been incredibly grisly. I think you forget how fast they're going along the pit lane. Being hit at 60 kilometers an hour by some carbon fiber blades is not a pretty picture. And it kind of reminds me of Britain, or the Silverstone Grand Prix last year, when there were protesters on the track, and luckily nothing bad happened there. So we've had these near misses twice now with people, and I just don't see how there isn't like a cordon or something. I saw as well, it wasn't just photographers, they were closing the pit lane, they were putting the
yes
like line across, which means the people in charge of the pit lane, who should know what's going on, put the line across. And to say it's regrettable is when you eat the last slice of bread and someone else needs it for breakfast, you go, oh, that was pretty regrettable. You get over it. Not, oops, we almost accidentally had an accident and impaled someone on the front of a Formula 1 car. I think an outright apology is needed, and some real review of the process, not a half-assed that's regrettable statement, a non-apology. So I don't know. I think they're going to have to review this, because I want to know what the positions are that prevent people going onto the pit lane. I want to know the procedures that allows the pit lane to be open and closed, because to close the pit lane before the race is finished seems bizarre to me as well. I don't know. I was half expecting when people ran onto the track for it to be immediately red flagged. That's the other thing I was going to ask, is surely if a whole load of people run onto a live track, it gets red flagged.
Yes.
They didn't red flag it.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
So why didn't they red flag it either? Why did the stewards go, hold on a minute, look at all those people on, red flag. That's it. All stops.
My only caveat to that would be, is it different between the actual racetrack and the pit lane? I don't know. That's an open question.
Well, should it be? Because 60 kilometres an hour is not exactly snail pace.
No, I agree. Someone could get damaged if they're either there on the pit lane or there at the racetrack. My only question or theory about why it wasn't red flagged is because it's slightly different with the pit lane, because of course there's speed limits there versus, let's say, on a track where there can be under yellow flag conditions, but many people have been caught speeding there, granted in the pit lane as well. So that could be the only reason why I think they haven't done that. But you are right, it should have been red flagged when you've got, not just one or two people, not that it matters the numbers, but dozens of people streaming on there and having to literally be pulled back by one another. You're right there, it should have been a lot more than just a load of words, quite frankly. And on that note, that seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 11 of F1 in Review 2023. Thank you once again for listening all the way to the end of this episode, be that on your preferred podcast provider or indeed elsewhere. A reminder, we are on Twitter and TikTok, our handle being F1 in Review. Now, after that drought of racing, it's like London buses almost, we've got one race after another. It's the Miami Grand Prix this time, so if you're watching this and listening to this, or indeed observing it in the UK, it starts qualifying, that is, at 9 PM, that being British Summer Time on the Saturday, the race being on the Sunday, that being 8 PM, once again British Summer Time if you're indeed watching, listening or observing here in the United Kingdom. So we will be back to go and talk more about that race and indeed the sort of leftover topics or themes from the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and the Baku Sprint. So do tune in next time and we'll be able to talk about a lot of F1 and a lot of things to come in the future. Thank you very much for listening and we'll see you next week.